Our guest for today's episode is Zain Khoja. He is currently studying information science at Cornell University and has previously interned at GitHub and Instagram. I am Mayank Khandelwal and you are listening to Whiteboard.fm. Okay. Hey Zen, what's up, man? It's great seeing you. Hope. How are you doing, man? How are things in terms of COVID? How's everything going?
Yeah, everything is good. Fortunately, I'm doing all right. Just getting to learn a lot. Work is really fun. Yeah, I mean, how are you?
Good, man. Good. So, Zen, why don't you tell us Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Zain. I just finished up my second year at Cornell University in Ithaca. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. And yeah, I'm a current product design intern at Instagram on the Reels team.
That's great. Zen, how did you get started in design? Since you're
Yeah.
studying Bachelor's of Science at Cornell, how did you get started in product design, and what got you excited about it?
Yeah, for sure. So, growing up, I've always really loved video games. And particularly, I think the most enjoyable part of video games to me have always been the storytelling aspect. I was always really attracted to Pokemon specifically, and also Legend of Zelda a lot, because I really just loved how these narratives were told, how these characters are built. So actually growing up, I wanted to be a game developer. And what happened was I realized that a lot of the tools that we use to build video games and other types of stories like this are not necessarily visual. And so I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do for a long time. And I was very fortunate. My cousin somehow stumbled upon product design when he was going into college. He was switching over from a different career, and he gave me an extra sketch key back in the day when you used to get 2 sketch keys. So I started playing around a lot with Sketch. I would make posters and t-shirts and stuff for my clubs at school. And eventually I started looking more into case studies. I think I read a lot of different Medium articles. I will say that I don't know that I got the most out of that part of it, but I think I did learn a lot about exactly what kind of steps, what product design was, what kind of steps you need to take to kind of get started. And yeah, I just started going off with going to different hackathons, and I would go to the hackathon, do a project real quick. And then for the next couple months, I would start backtracking and redoing that, trying to solve that problem with a longer, I think, design process, and then turning that into a case study. So for me, it was very much I kind of had to independently figure out what product thinking was, how to write a case study, and kind of going through that entire process. That's kind of how I got started.
That's great, man. And how has that journey escalated in terms of leveling up? What all have you been
Yeah.
doing since that started?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I think was I was in a very special situation where when I applied to college, I was actually accepted into a spring admit program. And so I didn't really know what I was going to do for the fall. And what I ended up doing was I went to hackathons and stuff like that. But what I spent a lot of time doing was just building up my portfolio, getting feedback. And I think as a student, I very much underestimate the power of feedback and the power of just meeting other people that are in design. During that semester, I had all the time in the world to just book as many one-on-ones with different designers through, I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with Cofolios, the website. I booked so many meetings there to just meet people, get feedback on my portfolio, get feedback on interviewing. And eventually I did a bunch of different applications. And GitHub allowed me to interview for their design systems intern position. And luckily that went through. So last summer I interned there on the design systems team, which is really cool experience. And then in the fall after that, I applied for the Instagram position, and that happened this summer.
Great, man. So let's deep dive into those experiences of yours. So how did GitHub work out? What was your process, and can you tell us more about what your internship process was?
Yeah. So for interviewing, I think I think the most difficult thing about um, trying to get into GitHub was probably just the fact that like so many companies really do rely on referrals and school recruiting. Um, I think I was very like 1 in 100. Like I got an email and it ended up working. Um, so yeah, like I got an email from the recruiter. I remember talking to her. It's very casual at first, and I think it was very much like, "What is your design process? It's like, how did you get into design?" Very similar to like this interview. Um, and after that, I had to do something similar to like a portfolio presentation, um, specifically because GitHub is more like focused on coding as a product. And the design systems team is also very much like designer engineer hybrids. I had like a coding interview, but it wasn't necessarily like back end coding. It was more of like, do you know HTML, CSS? Do you know how to do responsive design, um, type stuff? And that was a very interesting interview. I think like very unique from what I know now. And then after that, GitHub was also unique in that I had a lot of different like chats. Like I had a lot of, I think like here's like one meet the team interview. I had a couple, I think, one-on-ones with like my manager, who would be my manager for that summer. I even had actually, and I love that they did this. I had a diversity and inclusion interview where we specifically talked about like what kind of things I did outside of school, what kind of things I did within my own community, and how I like grew from my community and impact and gave back to that community. And I'm so happy that they did that, because it's a really, really great way to kind of like think like challenge myself to not only like recall what I love doing with my community, but also almost like make a promise to the company that I will keep doing that in a way. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how that interview process went. I usually had debriefs every day that I had an interview. I usually had a debrief with my recruiter at the end of the day.
That's great. So that would have reduced your kind of anxiousness as well, that you had a better idea of, okay,
Yeah,
this is how the interview went, and you don't need to worry about certain things, and there are certain things that you can improve or work on.
of course. Yeah.
That's great,
Yeah.
man. Are there any tasks that you can tell us more about that were given to you during your application process?
Um, I don't know that there's so many tasks as much as like very like standard like portfolio presentations. I feel like they do at every company. Um, I guess I can talk a little bit more about that. Portfolio presentation in general. The first time I applied for any design job, I didn't know that you needed a portfolio, like a slide deck. And a lot of companies I think also advise like candidates like, oh, technically you don't need a slide deck. But I do think like it's really useful, because when you're looking at like a website like portfolio, it's really meant for like a recruiter to spend 5 to 7 minutes on it and like move on after that. And so you want to keep it short and concise and give like kind of high level information. But when it comes to portfolio presentation, you have like 30, 45 minutes to go over like 1, 2 projects maybe. And so you can really like go in depth. The audience is completely different, right? Like there's totally different use case of you trying to tell a story about your project rather than just trying to get as much information out the door um, in a concise and like digestible manner. And so that's, I think, the one of like the biggest like tasks that I did have to end up doing for interviewing was just like making a slide deck, making sure it fit my style, making sure it fit like my portfolio. Everything was kind of cohesive brand wise for like me as an like an employee, or as a brand of myself, like that kind of stuff. And then also just making sure that I was including the right fidelity and amount of information and covering all my bases.
That's nice, man. Also, I've read a lot of things that you've written at Medium, actually, on Medium. And one of them being what you explained about your internship experience at GitHub. It wasn't in
Hmm.
detail, which is what I understand, that you cannot share everything because of the NDA and all those factors that come into play. But
Hmm.
you mentioned that you worked on Primer. Since you worked at GitHub as a design systems intern, you worked on Primer, that is GitHub's open source design system. Can you
Hmm.
tell us more about what that is and what role did you play?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, because GitHub's work is all open source, I can definitely talk about that, I think, a little bit more in depth. So what I worked on while I was there was, I think, a couple of things. One of the big things that I worked on, obviously design systems teams, I guess, for for people like don't know, design systems teams are there to support product designers. So a lot of design system teams will create and maintain a set of components, and color styles, text styles, content guidelines, all of these different kind of things that kind of, I think my manager said it really well, is that like design systems isn't like trying to box in product designers. It's more so as a guardrail for product designers to not go like too off the edge. Doesn't mean that you can't explore things, but yeah, it's like a good kind of like set of foundational guidelines. So I worked on that team, and what I personally, my personal project that I worked on was like helping designers basically not have to start from scratch every time. So a lot of our designers work on, obviously you draw out sketches, right? But then when you kind of start to explore things, you do this in medium fidelity. And you want to make sure that things are flexible, and you also don't want to like have to start from a blank canvas and recreate the same kind of issue page every time, or like a repo page every time. And so my project specifically worked on like these templates that would allow product designers to kind of have something to start with, and then they can work off of that. I spent a lot of time focusing on the exact like right shades of gray and like very, I think, nitpicky like details when it comes to graphic design, because like, with design systems, like these components become really widespread, and so you really have to put a lot of intentionality there. Another project, and the other project that I worked on was some core UI things. GitHub was starting to think about like a big visual refresh, which they released recently. And one of the things I worked on was more about like the empty states. So a lot of our empty states were pretty inconsistent. I did an audit of those, and I redesigned kind of like how we might look at them. And I did a lot of different like explorations there. Definitely that was more towards like the product design, I think, line between design systems and product design, but still very heavily like, because I was working on core components and getting feedback on that, is definitely kind of more in the design systems realm.
Nice. I also saw you shared somewhat a Figma file on your website. So if you can share your screen and give a walkthrough of that as well.
Oh, of the GitHub work?
Right.
Yeah, let me do it this way. Cool. Yeah, so I guess I can just like open this up. Can you all see that still? Yeah? Awesome. Yeah, I mean, yeah, this was kind of like one of my big projects. Essentially what I was saying about prototyping templates, this is basically like what I made for my project, which was like a way for product designers to not start from scratch. So this is like what a repo page might look like. And instead of having to like kind of go through and recreate all of these kind of smaller icons and components, the product designers could just have this and then start playing around and like completely destroying it however they needed to explore different things. We did this, yeah, for like web. We also did some mobile stuff. I also played a lot with like constraints. I think I really leveraged Figma here because like all of these frames, like we would drag them out and they're actually like responsive in the actual Figma file. But yeah, like, I mean, I think I got like some feedback about like how exactly like what fidelity we needed these in, and whether the responsiveness was useful. And I think it did help like a few different designers like get their own projects kind of like off the ground pretty quickly.
Nice, man. This is really awesome stuff, especially since a lot of designers are not well versed with design systems. Like I've noticed certain words are used very interchangeably, like component libraries, design systems, style guides. A lot of designers assume all of it's the same, which is so not true. Like there are such nuances between each and every one of them, and they have a niche of their own. So this is great. I feel like getting the experience of working as a design systems intern and working around design systems is like really cool.
Yeah, I definitely think like design systems supports designers in the same way that like systems, like internal tools, eng teams might support engineers. It's very similar in that fashion.
Great, man. Great stuff. So after GitHub, you applied for Instagram in the fall, and then you are interning there right now, or you just completed interning there?
Yeah, next week is my last week, which is really sad. Yeah, I love working here. Yeah, so I can talk a little about the interview process there.
Definitely. Tell us
So
about the if you can tell us about your interview process for getting the internship at Instagram.
yeah, so I will say like because I had gone through one interview process with GitHub, and then I had a semester at school by that time. Um, I did have like friends who were willing to refer me, and like I said, like I think it's kind of difficult because like it's kind of difficult to like I don't always feel the best about like someone referring me because I do think like it does make it like harder for it to be a fair playing field for people who cold apply, because I was in that position like a year ago. Um, but yeah, no, I think the referral definitely like helped. And once I had the referral, a recruiter reached out pretty early. Facebook is generally, I think, like one of the most, in my experience, is like the fastest or the most early recruiting cycle for design. They start around August and they do rolling all the way like through January, so it's almost ongoing all the time. Um, and yeah, so I went really early. Like they reached out in or very early August. I had responded, and they got back to me about like scheduling a first interview like August 15th or something. It was really early. Um, After that, I did it's very like simple recruiter call type stuff. And for Facebook, the actual design part of the interview was two parts. For my school, I think they do this very differently by school, but for my school, we had two back-to-back interviews for about 45 minutes. We did portfolio presentation and we did an app critique. So I guess I explained presentation earlier, but for app critiques, basically like you just talk with a designer through a popular app, and like you generally, I think like the best way to do this is usually talking about like the overall people problem the app is solving, how, we might have solved this problem before. So like, for example, with Google Maps, like how did we solve the problem before Google Maps existed? It was really hard. We'd print out like, MapQuest and stuff and then like have to read it. Um, and before that, you had to use a real map. So like talking about how the app solves our goals today, and then walking through a flow and talking about what's great and why you think like designers made these certain choices, as well as thinking about where there lies more opportunity to further iterate on that process. I think a lot of people kind of get the app critique part a little bit, like they focus on the critique a little bit too much. But everything is designed, like everything in the world has been designed, and there's someone behind that decision. And so I think it's really helpful to like take some time to think about like why that decision was made a certain way.
What I really like about what you just mentioned is that you had to explain design decisions, right? Now,
Mhm.
as a beginner, people find it very difficult to explain their design decisions. The one big way of justifying their own design decisions is by saying that this bigger company has done it this way, which is why we also felt that it should be done this way. So, what were your ways of getting that knowledge such that you can justify your designs properly?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think like a lot of times we do look at like bigger companies, we're like, oh yeah, Apple applied this specific drop shadow, so all my designs will have this specific drop shadow. I think it's really helpful to like I said, I think when you work in at a big company, a lot of the kind of pixels, I want to say like the very specific color choices and everything, those things are decided for you. What a product designer really does is think through problems and think about why we're solving something this way. Honestly, I can't point you to like a specific way that I just started being able to explain my design decisions, more so than just like sitting back in my chair and like thinking like, why in the world would this like be designed this way? Like, who is it helping if it's designed this way versus a different way? And if you do get stuck in that, again, like office hours, like one-on-ones with people, those things are really helpful. Like these are the kind of conversations that I think designers like love to have. Like, hey, do you feel like it's weird that like Netflix uses all black for their background? No, I don't think so, because I watch it at night all the time. And like getting these different perspectives is super, super useful to design. And I think the community is almost like a learning tool in a way.
I love this. I'm loving this conversation. I love the points you're bringing forth. Um, Adding to it, a lot of designers read case studies. For example, I read a lot of case studies. I watch a lot of videos. Just like you mentioned, talking to
Mhm.
other designers, having one-on-ones is also a great way of communicating, exchanging ideas, and getting newer perspectives. How often do you read case studies then? And which medium do you prefer?
Ooh, that's a good question. I haven't read. I don't want to say like I used to read case studies, like I said, on Medium a lot. But right now, I feel like the most interesting things to me are like whenever I kind of am just like looking at another person's design portfolio, I look at their case studies. Um, it's kind of weird because like I used to listen to student designers on podcasts, and now I'm talking about one. I also used to meet a lot of designers through Cofolios, and now I host meetings on Cofolios. Um, but like those, I think a lot of the case studies I do end up reading are like people that want to just chat, and so they book time, and I read over their portfolios and I read their case studies. um, and I think the more I read it, the more I kind of like understand what should be there and what's missing, because I'm more like consuming them than necessarily creating them. um, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably my main way.
That's great. So this is your way of getting perspective in terms of what new problems are there and how are they being solved by all these other designers that are out there. Dribble is a
Yep.
source which is there for inspiration. It's not, a lot of designers say it's not really used for problem solving. Fine, agreed. To some extent, to each one his or her own. What do you look for? What do you do when you're searching for inspiration? Do you look for design
Mhm.
sources, or do you look for sources outside design?
Yeah, I think when I was starting design, I was around the age where like I didn't care too much about Dribble, because it ended up being like very like I started using Medium, and had friends and stuff that were doing design. I definitely like I have an account on Dribble. I check it sometimes. Like I think I check it very infrequently. Um, I I feel like most of my real inspiration honestly just comes from like just like doing things, which is why particularly during COVID it's been a little bit more difficult to like figure out inspiration and think to be like, have these really amazing blue sky like ideas that kind of pop into my head. Like those don't happen because I'm not going out and seeing things and doing different experiences and et cetera, et cetera. But um generally I think like those are the type, like just doing things that make you really uncomfortable are usually like how I get inspiration, because it's like talking to people who just have such a different way, like lifestyle than yourself, that like that's kind of when you can start looking at like tooling and whatever kind of product you're building. Like you can start looking at that kind of use case from a different lens, and get inspiration about like how to solve a problem in a more like I think informed way.
Interesting. That's a really nice. That's a unique insight, actually. Also, like since you mentioned your internship process at Instagram, can you tell us more about your work? Since everyone here knows that you worked on Reels.
Yeah, I mean I don't know how much I can say there. I will say that like the Reels team is probably one of the like best things I could have gotten. I feel extremely fortunate to work on this product. It's also just like such a unique, I think, like problem space, and like I don't know, just a very unique like team to be on in these times. Um, yeah, I mean, in terms
Okay,
of actual work, yeah, I don't know how much
instead
I can
of deep
say.
diving into your team, let's talk about your experience at Instagram as a designer holistically.
Sure, yeah,
How
totally.
was your experience? What kind of a paradise is Instagram for a designer?
Okay, I don't think anything's a paradise. I think everything has its problems, and everything has areas of improvement. Um, but I will say this is probably one of those places where I feel like I've met so many people who openly acknowledge that there are problems, and where there are problems that there are actions. Um, yeah, I mean, my experience as a designer, I guess, at this company in general is just like so different from last summer. I think like there's very visible like big company, there's very visible benefits to being at a big company. um, like the design team is absolutely massive at Facebook in general, and within Instagram it's smaller but still like really really big. So the benefits that come with that is just like I've been able to talk to literally whoever I want. I can message them, and if they're like a designer I've looked up to, like they're willing to have 30 minutes with me, and that's probably been like the most priceless thing I could ever ask for. um, I feel like the relationships I've like generated at this company are really just like really really priceless. um, I think like Instagram just has a very big it's not that the entire company, I don't want to say, is like design focused. There is a high level, like a high bar for craft and simplicity, I think. But it's also that every other team outside of design values design. And that's something that I feel in my experience has been very unique. When I talk to engineers, they like make product suggestions. You know, there are content strategists who question visual design decisions, and just kind of this interoperability between all the teams, just really caring about the product at the end of the day, is probably like the best thing. And it's what makes, you know, like Instagram really fun to work at, because, you know, everyone just cares a lot and everyone's very invested in the product. You want to, you know, help out with some other team, like you can just hit up a designer who's working on the thing and ask them if they're open to collaboration. And, you know, most of the time they are.
Tell us more about the Instagram team, the design team at Instagram. What's the team size? What is the structure, and how do you guys operate?
Yeah. I mean, again, because of COVID, I think I may not be the best like estimator for this kind of stuff. I will say that there are various teams, obviously. Like there's the Reels team, there's stories, there's camera, there's like well-being. And everyone kind of focuses on their own thing in a way. But at the same time, like we all, because the design team is like small enough where everyone can chat with each other, there is a lot of like, you know, if you go and check out, say, someone's work and they've been working on a specific, you know, part of the app, for example, like if they're working on the camera and you're starting to think that like maybe this feature that you're working on, like, you know, on home would fit well on the camera, then like you can go talk to that person and kind of riff off ideas there. I think everyone's also just very, very intentional, and like that's another, I think, big factor. I don't think anyone makes any decisions without there being a solid set of reasons that the entire team has kind of been aligned on. However, there is a lot of ownership. Like that's probably one of the bigger things that surprised me, because I'm not really used to that. Coming in on the team, I had like starter projects and a couple main projects, and like, I mean, the first time I walked into a design crit with like a final design kind of, like near the end of my starter project, I actually was like expecting to have like a vote almost in my head. I was just like, oh, are we all just gonna vote on like the best one option here? And like my manager, I think we had a one-on-one after, and he was like, no, you make the decision based on the feedback and what you think is the best choice. Like we all have trust that you will make the right decision. And I think that reinforces it, right? Like the design team has a very high level of trust with each other. So like if someone is working on something and you're very passionate about that, but you trust the other designer will do a good enough job, and they will, like, you know, really be thorough and intentional about how they're solving the problem.
That's really good stuff. I like how the team at the company emphasizes a lot on responsibility and ownership, is what you mentioned.
Yep.
So tell me more about the Reels team. How many members were there, and what was it?
Yeah. The Reels team, I don't want to throw any numbers because the Reels team is like always changing, I think, okay. In terms of like the size. Yeah, I mean, you know, like when a product launches, like depending on how it does, like we definitely like change and people work on stuff. I mean, the Reels team was very, I think, like this isn't like a thing that, you know, just kind of came about overnight, or even like this summer. Like it's been a long time coming. And like you can find news articles from a while back, you know, when they started looking into short form video. Yeah, like the Reels team specifically, I think, is just very unique also in terms of design, in that like there are so many designers that I think are tenured, but also they're tenured designers, but they're also like, I think, younger designers, which is awesome, because like it's like kind of it provides a good balance of like, here's how this gigantic company and this massive product works, and you know, here's how we make it, like this is how we need to have it fit into the ecosystem, at the same time with like all of these user needs, trends, and I think like cultural affiliation that like younger designers may be more in tune with. Not to say like older designers aren't in tune with it, but I think like there's definitely like a difference between trying to tackle like the teen audience from outside versus like having kind of grown up with this product.
That's good stuff, man. So then now that you've told us about your journey at GitHub and your journey at Instagram, I wanted to ask you this. What are your top learnings from both these companies? And what are the nuances that you've come across?
Yeah, for sure. So I think with GitHub, the biggest thing I learned uh was just like how to operate in a corporate environment. I feel like as my first internship and as someone who's pretty young, like I didn't know really anything. Like I didn't know how to, how to reach out to people. I didn't really know like what I was supposed to be doing all the time. I didn't understand, my manager, it's funny, my manager will always tell me like I think like you should spend more time like not necessarily writing things or putting down pixels, but just like thinking about the problem. And I never understood like what she meant by that until I think almost the end of the internship, unfortunately. Um, and so yeah, that's probably like my biggest learning was just like trying to better understand how these roles operate at a very professional and a high level. From I think from Instagram, my biggest learning, I have multiple learnings because I applied a lot of the things that I learned at GitHub at Instagram, like being proactive about meeting and reaching out to people. I think the biggest thing I learned at Instagram was just like to be concise and to show more than tell. And like we try to do this right with case studies. We try to use images and not go too deep on research, not go too deep on the solution, but it is way I think more important when you can really just like show someone how it works, or even let them play around with the prototype on their own, and it just gives the other person you're trying to communicate with such a better understanding of what you're trying to solve, how you think this solves the problem. um, and so like prototyping and shorting like concise communication tools became like really invaluable, I think.
Nice. That's really cool stuff, man. Um, One thing I also noticed is that at Cornell, what you do apart from studying and doing extracurricular activities, one of the extracurricular activities is you teach product design to a lot of students.
Yeah.
So another thing that I wanted to ask is, being a designer who's learning as well as a designer who's teaching, how do you balance the trade-off between learning stuff and teaching stuff?
Yeah. I don't know who decided I was qualified to teach product design, but I teach the intro to digital product design class, which is like a 2 credit pass fail course. It's a completely student run course, which is I think there's some like pros and cons to that. I think to answer your question about balancing it, I feel like it always comes down for me to like, what do I feel comfortable teaching and confident in like imparting on students, while at the same time kind of leaving room for interpretation and room for exploration. I think like one of my biggest fears is that I go into this class and I teach someone this like, very strict like case study focused design process, and they come out not like wanting to kind of deviate from that. And so we like in our class, we go a lot through like, yes, this is the design process. And in the last lecture, we tell them to throw away the process, because at the end of the day, it is a process, right? And like there are certain parts that are more applicable at times than others. And you may not need to do little sketches for every little thing. You may not need to do prototyping for every little feature. But it's good to know and kind of have the basics of the entire process and be a generalist, as you say. Um, for me, like learning, I think always typically has occurred in like moments of boredom or like through work experience, I think. um I really can't personally ever, like I can't deal with boredom. So I like a lot of times like I have relaxing days, but once I hit like 3 or 4 days of doing absolutely nothing, I like can't do that anymore. I have to like do a little bit of something for at least an hour or two a day. And so I either learn, I think, during those moments, during extended breaks, like winter breaks, or between like internship and school, or I, have these massive like learning phases during work. Like for example, I think I learned Origami Studio, like the prototyping software. Like I learned the entire thing in like a week because I just had to for work. Um, and yeah, so it's kind of like a trade-off. Sometimes I learn because of pressure. Sometimes I learn because like I can't not do anything.
That's really nice, man. What I also like about you, Zen, is that you do a lot of volunteer work. is that you've also mentioned at the beginning of the interview that you do like it's about helping people, and it's also which is why design is really nice. You like design as well because it's about the entire community is focused towards progressive learning, and it's not like, okay, I'll do my thing secretly and I won't share it with everyone till I'm going for glory. Like it's about sharing things as well. So can you tell
Yeah.
us more about the volunteer work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like in the GitHub interviews, it was really helpful to kind of reflect a little bit on the types of volunteer work I have done. Um, I don't know. I feel like I get a lot out of the design community. Like I take a lot from people's time. And so I feel like the very least I can do is teach the class, you know, open source our resources, spend time with other students who are like not I think who just like who just found out about design and are trying to figure out like how to navigate that space. Um, I also think like it's important not to look at like volunteering as like eh, I don't think I think volunteering is something that like is more so like I feel like I get more out of volunteering than I'm actually providing value. And so for me, it's more of like oh cool, like I get to meet people like for no reason. You know, like and if I can answer a couple of their questions and I just get to meet them, like great, that's like a great trade-off for me. Um, and yeah, I mean it's helping someone else. Yeah, I don't really know how much more there is to say about it.
For sure, man. Like all of this is really nice. Like I like how you are very well aware and mindful about giving as much as you are taking, which is something which a lot of, especially so early, like you're still studying, right? You're still at Cornell, and being mindful and aware of all this, even knowing all this and being thinking that I want to carry this forward and level up and do more of this, amplify it, is very nice. I get to some of the questions that people are asking. So you mentioned
Sure.
that you created a slide deck for your interviews, right? So
Hmm.
what's the process of creating a slide deck?
Ooh, yeah. I will tell you, it's very confusing at first because there is no like article about this one. Um, like I said, I think like slide decks are best meant for storytelling. And so my general like idea, I think my manager this summer actually helped me a lot with this, but it's like understanding like what you're trying to accomplish is the most important thing. Are you trying to align your, you know, your team on what your project is, or are you trying to like show that you know the process of design? Are you trying to like justify your solution? These are all very different use cases. And you make a slide deck, I think, like based on that. I don't make a slide deck for every single one of my case studies. I make a slide deck for me, my like the slide deck I usually make is for presentations for interviewing. Um, and what that means is that my use case is showing the design process, but also showing that I know how to justify and make trade-offs. And usually that's probably like the most important thing.
Nice. Also, another question is that how do you go about when you're learning a new skill or a software? Like you mentioned, you figured out origami by Facebook in a week, and a part of it can also be because you were saturated with everything else that you were laser focused towards this. But what's the process when you're picking up a new software?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, like I'm a very hands-on person, so I usually learn things when I kind of have to do it. So that's why I think origami for me like was very accelerated because I had a goal at the end of the week that I needed to have a prototype done, and so I learned it. You know, I just had to like kind of dive deep into it and try to do something. And when I got stuck, I just asked someone for help. I looked up resources, and I kept going forward. It's kind of like trudging through the mud a little bit. There's obstacles, and you just kind of have to like push through it and figure out how to overcome them. In terms of like learning a new skill or software on my own time, I think for the most part, like honestly, I'm okay. Like I'm a very lazy person when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like I'm not good at learning things without use cases. Um, and so like when I do get bored, I might like try to learn something, but typically like won't stay in my head until I actually have to use it. And once I have like a big enough use case, then yeah, I'll remember for a long time, such as like, you know, making a pretty complex prototype. Now I will like remember how to use origami because I had to use not only basic skills, but I had to kind of move past that and look at like what more advanced things can I do to make this prototype more realistic. Um, and yeah, like once I got past the learning curve, then I like understood it. I will say though, like I've been in 3 different intro CS classes, and now I know what like the abstract understanding of what an object is, but I like cannot remember syntax for the life of me. And I won't know it until I, have to do this at a professional level for like a long time. And I just know that like that's not how my brain will work. And so that's kind of, I think, how, yeah, that's usually how my learning works. But obviously I think it's different for everyone. Everyone works differently.
Definitely. What you mentioned what you mentioned right now, and when you were telling us your experience at GitHub, was that you shipped code, right? You wrote code at times. And tell us what impact or what kind of an advantage does knowing how to code have for you as a designer?
Yeah, wait, let me be very clear. I did not ship any like production level code at GitHub. I did use like basically the way it was set up for our documentation systems was that like I was able to like write like 2 or 3 lines of JavaScript and then write everything else in Markdown, and I was able to ship that as documentation. The only time I really have coded is like I go to pretty, I think, big lengths to justify coding my own design portfolio. Now that there are better tools out there, like if I was starting from scratch, I probably wouldn't code. But when I did start, I had used HTML, CSS, JavaScript, very little JavaScript, almost all HTML, CSS, and I use GitHub pages to like host and do that kind of stuff. And now I just kind of use it as like, here's my experience doing very base level web design, and I want to keep working at it so I can better understand these things as they evolve in the future. I want to say though, knowing intro, I think data structures, knowing code in general, I think is extremely helpful as a designer. I also took an intro to iOS course, which is basically like a sister course to the design course I teach. Same, like we live under the same like project team. It's also a student run course.
Right.
And a small plug, like all their videos are on YouTube. So if you want to learn iOS, like it's all online for free. But taking that class, even though I don't remember syntax, like I said, I think a lot of the concepts that I understood there helped me to work with iOS engineers today, and understanding like kind of a little bit of the quips that happen with like how they run simulators, how they actually like code things up, what kind of APIs exist, how to access different like elements of the actual physical device. These kind of things help you build empathy, I think, with engineers, and also help you communicate and offer, I don't want to say like offer suggestions, because sometimes they know, so much more than you, obviously, for the most of the time they know way more than you. But it's good to like have a little bit of base knowledge, I think, and it helps you collaborate.
Makes a lot of sense. This has been great, Zain. Your career path so far, your story, and the things that you've done, that was so early, has been amazing. It's inspiring for all the design aspirants out there, for those who are watching this interview right now with us, and also once it's on YouTube. Thanks a lot for being here. If I had to ask you your question, last question, if I had to ask from my side before we jump to the Q&A, is that from your entire design journey, if I had to ask you what are your top 3 learnings, what would they be?
I think that's a good question. I think the biggest thing that I've learned just being a designer is to like calm down about things. Like, I feel like when I was like learning design, like it was very easy to like look at something and say like, oh, why do they do that? That's a dumb feature. Like it doesn't make sense at all. Like it's just ruining my user journey. Like I wanted to use the app the specific way. But I think now it's just like I think a lot before I like say these things, because like now I understand there's an entire team of people who did research. There are users, there's a need for this in some place. And whether it's right or not to like, include this feature in the app is like way above my pay grade. And it's also not really like, I don't have all the context to be saying these things. I think that's it, like, I just think like you're like, my opinion, and everyone who's a designer, a young designer especially, like your opinion is totally useful. It's very, very important. But I think it's really important to gather context before you kind of like I think comment on something, because there is so much context, especially now that now that we live in a world where like information is very snackable and at kind of your fingertips. It's very very important to like do your research and kind of understand the entire situation of how things work now more than ever.
That's great, man. What are your other learnings? Like, this is one
Yeah,
primary learning that you explained, actually.
yeah. Yeah. So like so I think my biggest learning is thoughtfulness. I would say a second learning is the value of like making friends. I actually talked to another intern last summer about like how to draw the line between networking and like building real relationships. And I think he was like we both kind of were on the same page about like forget networking. Like that's not a thing. Like forget like this whole term of like building relationships. Yes, you can explain how, you know, you build friendships, but like if you just approach everyone as a person, it makes things like 20 times easier. I don't think like I think when you try to kind of manufacture these relationships like over online and stuff, like it makes it very difficult to, I think, like really get to understand and know someone. One of the things that I feel like I've personally like always just tried to do is like whenever someone tries to add me on like a social media platform, like for example, like if it's like LinkedIn or Facebook, if you're someone that like it's like a mutual relationship, I like basically won't accept it unless like someone does like a video call with me or like sets up, like I don't accept things like this from people that I don't know generally, because it's just like I want to know you as a person. I don't want to know you as like a connection.
Right.
And I mean, I leave a lot of opportunities. I hope there are enough opportunities to like for people to meet me if they want to, through things like, you know, like I have links on my portfolio. I leave my Twitter DMs open. I'm happy to like take time and talk to people over portfolios. But yeah, like, I mean, I think just approaching people as like friendships more so than connections is like a really great way to just like get to know more of the community and be more involved. So that's another really big learning is to approach things like that. And I guess the last learning, I would say is like, don't undervalue like technical skills. I know a lot of, when I was learning design, a lot of people would tell me like, oh, focus on soft skills, focus on like, you know, like you can focus on product thinking and stuff, because once you figure out the problem solving, which is the hard part, you will get the technical skills. You can figure that part out. I do agree, but honestly, for me, like the technical skills have always been way harder than like the problem solving skills. It's been really difficult for me to like learn things like just new coding languages and like new frameworks and all these kind of things. I think like the more projects you can do and the more applicable knowledge, the more you can apply your knowledge to things, physical, tangible projects and things, the better. That being said, make sure it's something you're passionate about. Don't just make projects for the sake of like making projects. Like it's very important that you are passionate about something. And if you're not, you know, like go experience life and figure out something you're passionate about. There's no pressure. It's like you should be doing things for fun more so than doing them out of necessity.
These are some great learnings, man. I so relate with the second point that you mentioned about not just creating connections, but building upon them. Even if you reach out to someone who's like countries apart and like thousands of miles apart, you can start off by just like conversing and maybe build upon it. The more you share your views and also ask for their views and interact more, the more you build upon it. And that is how someone will help you. If you need help, you can't just go join some community, ask for your help and then get away with it. You need to add value to get value.
Yeah, exactly. I also think a big part of it is like, don't be afraid, you know, just like there are a lot of people whose work you might admire, and like it can't hurt to just email them or shoot them a DM and say like, hey, like I love your work, I have these questions for you, and please make sure they're like specific questions, you know. Don't just be like, hey, I want to talk to you because you're cool. Like you should have some kind of purpose and you know, be of value to them as well, in addition to asking for help.
This has been great, Zain. Thanks a lot for being a part of this episode. Can't wait for everyone to see this. How was the experience? I want to know how you felt, and if you've given more interviews as well, and what was your perspective?
Yeah, this is the first podcast I've been on, I think. The funny part about it is like this summer I started like a Notion table, and I have a personal Notion. I started like a table where I just note all the kind of like funny milestones or things that have happened to me as I'm starting off my career. I think it'd just be like really funny to have at the end of the day. So I think like I wrote like when my first internship was, when was the first time a feature that I worked on got leaked. I put this one in there. I think like was on a podcast for the first time. No, it's been a really great experience. I think like you did a great job with like the questions. I've loved having it more of like a conversation basis. And no, like these are awesome questions also from everyone in the chat also. So yeah.
So this brings us to the end of our session. Thanks again, Zain. This has been great. I'm pretty sure everyone who's been watching tonight has loved every bit of it and has had new perspective, because not everyone gets to talk to some designers who worked at big companies, and especially when the age group is very similar. So it's like knowing from a peer how things were in their perspective, how their experience was, because that is something that they could feel as well had they been in that place or that situation. So thanks a lot, man. It was great knowing you. Let's definitely catch up once. I would definitely love to be on a call with you and just discuss stuff and like know more about how things are in Dallas.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. This is really awesome. I can't wait for the episode to come out. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And yeah, like feel free to book time with me on Cofolios or like connect with me over, Twitter or something.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and I hope you liked it. If you watched the entire video, drop a comment below sharing your favorite learnings from this interview to let us know. Subscribe to the Whiteboard.fm YouTube channel to check out other episodes and clips from this interview. This podcast is a part of the 10K Designers Network. You can check out other projects on 10kdesigners.com.